Dale stood frozen in the packed diner, the clatter of plates suddenly loud. Brenda's hand too casually brushed Mike's arm across their table. Then he saw it, a key card from the Grand River Inn tucked into her napkin. Mike caught his eye, a smirk barely hidden, and Brenda whispered, "Don't be ridiculous, Dale, it's nothing." The truck hummed beneath Dale, a steady vibration against his seat. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The late afternoon sun, low and harsh, glinted off the passing storefronts of Grand River, Michigan. His mind, usually a quiet place focused on inventory or the next golf swing, now churned with a slow, building heat. Rage wasn't his usual companion, not this quiet, insidious kind that felt less like anger and more like a permanent shift in the world's axis. Everything he thought he knew had tilted, just slightly, but enough to throw him off balance completely. Dale's life had been a simple, predictable path. The family restaurant, Valentini's, had been his father's, then his. Generations of his Italian family had poured their sweat into those red sauce dishes, the smell of garlic and oregano, a constant in his childhood. He had Brenda, 7 years his wife, and the small house on Elm Street. He figured he had it all figured out, or close enough. Then Grandma Florence's voice, raspy and knowing, echoed in his head. "Watch out for that one, Dale," she'd said years ago when he first brought Brenda home. "She has that look." At the time, he dismissed it as old-world superstition, a grandmother's overprotective worry. Now, the words felt like a prophecy. It had been a month since the crack first appeared. He'd found it, tucked deep in Brenda's purse, beneath a tangle of old receipts and lipsticks. A cheap ballpoint pen, promotional, with the name Grand River Inn printed on the side. They'd never stayed at the Grand River Inn. It was one of those places on the edge of town, mostly for business travelers or people passing through. He remembered looking at it, turning it over in his hand, the plastic warm from her bag. His stomach had tightened, a cold knot forming, but he'd tucked the pen back, pushed the thought down. It felt too big, too ugly to acknowledge. He wanted to believe it was nothing. A pen she'd picked up somewhere. A mistake. That was the first crack, small but deep, in the pavement of his simple life. Tonight they were meeting Frank and Sharon for dinner. Distant family, but Frank had always been a steady presence in Dale's life. A man who seemed to have a way of handling things, always looking out for him. Sharon, Frank's wife, was small but feisty, with a sharp wit Dale appreciated. Their usual spot was a quiet Italian place, not his family's restaurant, but another one with dark wood and red checkered tablecloths, tucked into a strip mall on the east side. Dale's cousin, Sal, ran the place. Sal led them to their usual secluded corner table, away from the main dining room, just as Frank and Sharon were settling in. "Hey, Dale," Frank said, a familiar grin. "Brenda." "Frank, Sharon," Dale responded, pulling out Brenda's chair. "Good to see you." They made small talk about Sal's new specials, the weather, and then Sharon turned to Brenda. "Are Mike and Lisa coming tonight? I thought you said they might." Brenda nodded, smoothing her napkin on her lap. "A little late. Mike hasn't gotten home yet from his meeting. Lisa said she's just waiting on him." Frank glanced at Dale then, a quick, almost imperceptible shake of his head. It was subtle, but Dale caught it, a flicker of something unreadable in Frank's eyes. He filed it away, another small detail in a month full of them. Mike was his golf buddy, a co-worker down at the plant. He and Lisa were a regular part of their social circle. Lately, though, Lisa had seemed off, quiet, her eyes always darting away when Dale caught her looking. Just then, Mike and Marlisa walked in. They were both flushed, as if they'd been rushing, or maybe something else. A tension clung to them, like static electricity in the air, noticeable the moment they approached the table. Frank, who had been chatting with Sharon, stopped mid-sentence. He stared at Mike, his face unreadable, his gaze direct and unwavering. Dale felt his gut clench. Frank's look confirmed it. Something was definitely wrong. They exchanged greetings, the usual work and family chatter, but it felt hollow, the words bouncing off a thick, unspoken wall. The plates were cleared, and the hum of conversation lessened as the restaurant began to empty. From the lounge area, a live band started up, a local trio playing soft rock and country covers. Brenda, Sharon, and Lisa brightened, already tapping their feet. "Let's go dance," Sharon said, pulling Frank's arm. Brenda nodded eagerly. Dale, Frank, and Mike migrated to a small, upholstered booth near the bar, ordering another round of cocktails. Frank had a scotch, neat. Mike ordered a beer, and Dale stuck with his usual gin and tonic. The conversation drifted to local sports, the Tigers' chances this season, and the Lions' perennial struggles. But their eyes kept returning to the dance floor, watching the women. Brenda moved with a certain fluid grace, her dark hair catching the dim lights. When a slow song came on, she pulled Dale onto the floor. She pressed close, her hand resting lightly on his neck. But Dale's mind was not on the rhythm. The unease from dinner had intensified, a dull throb behind his eyes. He felt her breath on his ear, smelled her perfume, but it was as if a pane of glass separated them. He tried to focus, to feel the connection he usually felt, but it wasn't there. Frank, ever the pragmatist, led Sharon back to their table after a single slow dance. But Mike and Lisa remained on the floor. Dale watched them. They danced stiffly, their movements almost synchronized in their awkwardness. Too close for casual friends. Mike kept his hand low on Lisa's back, a little too proprietary. "Everything okay with those two?" Dale whispered to Brenda as the song ended. He felt the need to voice it, to see her reaction. She pulled away slightly, her shoulder bumping his. "Why wouldn't it be?" Her voice was flat, a little too quick. She shrugged an almost imperceptible movement, and her eyes skittered away from his. "They're just dancing." Back at the table, Frank caught Dale's eye, a slight, knowing smile playing on his lips. Dale felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. Frank knew something. He'd seen it in the car, at dinner, and now again. Lisa, after another song, announced she needed the restroom. "Bathroom break, ladies," she said with a forced cheerfulness that sounded brittle. Brenda and Sharon nodded, and the three women disappeared toward the back of the lounge, leaving the men to themselves. This was the women's conference, as Dale called it, where they discussed whatever women discussed in hushed tones. When the women were out of earshot, Frank turned to Mike, his expression suddenly serious. His voice was cool, level, with just a hint of steel. "Everything all right, Mike? You seemed a little out of sorts earlier." Mike shifted in his seat, his hand going to the neck of his beer bottle. He stammered, "Yeah, Frank, just a long day. Big meeting at the plant, you know how it is." His eyes avoided Frank's, darting around the room instead. He took a long swallow of beer, his Adam's apple bobbing. Before Frank could press further, Lisa reappeared, followed by Brenda and Sharon. Lisa slid back into the booth next to Mike, their knees brushing under the table. She didn't look at Dale or Frank, just adjusted her purse, her shoulders tight. Mike immediately reached for her hand, a gesture that seemed less affectionate and more like a possessive claim. Their body language, the way they leaned ever so slightly away from each other while simultaneously being too close, screamed volumes. Brenda looked at Dale then, a quick, almost panicked flash in her gaze. Discomfort, guilt, he couldn't quite name it, but it was there, raw and unmistakable. Then just as quickly, she looked away, back to the band. Dale's heart began to thud, a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. Under the table, Frank's hand nudged Dale's knee, a subtle movement only Dale would feel. He risked a glance at Frank, who gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible wink. That was it. Dale's gut feeling, the cold certainty that had been building all night, solidified. Frank knew. More dancing ensued, a few more partners switched. Dale found himself on the floor with Sharon, then Lisa, a forced ease permeating the air. But the tension remained, thick and unspoken, a palpable layer beneath the polite smiles and small talk. It felt like walking on thin ice, waiting for it to crack. As they finally prepared to leave, collecting their coats and saying their goodbyes, Dale noticed Brenda. She was at the other end of the room, near the exit, talking to Mike. They were standing close, their heads bent together, speaking in hurried, hushed tones. Brenda's hand so casually reached out and touched Mike's forearm, a lingering touch that was too intimate for friends, too familiar for colleagues. That was it. The small touch, the hushed voices, the way Mike looked down at her. It wasn't just a pen or a glance or a strained conversation. It was real, it was happening. Brenda and Mike, an unspoken intimacy hanging in the air between them, sealing Dale's worst suspicions into a hard, undeniable truth. The weeks that followed the dinner at Sal's restaurant blurred into a grim, watchful routine. Every glance Brenda gave, every casual word she uttered was scrutinized, picked apart in Dale's mind. His days became a series of quiet observations, a silent, methodical hunt for confirmation. He was no detective, but a man driven by a gnawing certainty, unwilling to let the truth remain hidden. He started with the hotel pen. He remembered the name, Grand River Inn. It was the same hotel Mike often mentioned, offhand during golf outings or breaks at the plant. Had a late one at the Grand River Inn last night, Mike would say, referring to a fictitious business meeting. Dale had always taken it at face value, never questioning the details of Mike's work trips. Now the memory felt like a sucker punch. The hotel was close to the plant, convenient for Mike, and just far enough from their neighborhood to feel anonymous. Dale began tracking Brenda's movements. He'd check her phone when she left it unattended, looking for names he didn't recognize, for texts that seemed too guarded. He'd cross-reference her casual remarks about errands or visits to friends with her actual schedule, noting the small discrepancies. A quick trip to the grocery store that took 3 hours, a lunch with a friend he'd never heard of, a late evening at the gym that left her less sweaty than usual. Each small lie was a tiny chip in the foundation of their life together. The real confirmation came with the GPS tracker. He bought it online, a small magnetic device he could attach discreetly to the underside of Brenda's car. One Tuesday afternoon, while Brenda was at what she called a yoga class, Dale checked the tracker. The small red dot on the screen glowed, stationary, at the address of the Grand River Inn. It stayed there for an hour and a half before moving again, heading back toward their neighborhood. That night, she smelled faintly of cheap air freshener and something else, something cloying he couldn't quite place. His chest felt like it was caving in. The emotional toll was immense, a heavy, suffocating weight. It settled in his chest, making each breath feel shallow, insufficient. He ate less, slept fitfully, if at all. The world outside, the bright Midwestern sun, the familiar faces at Valentini's, all seemed to exist in a muted, distant haze. Inside, he wrestled with the crushing reality, the betrayal eating at him from the inside out. His days had turned gray, stripped of their former color and light. His internal monologue was a torrent. Anger, white-hot and searing. Confusion, a jumble of why and how. And a deep, aching sense of loss for the life he thought he had, for the woman he thought he knew. He'd loved Brenda. He still did, a part of him. But that love was now contaminated, poisoned by the knowledge of her deceit. He found himself replaying moments, conversations, searching for clues he'd missed, for any sign that would have prepared him for this. There were none. Or rather, he had simply refused to see them. He started planning, not for reconciliation, not for understanding, but for a confrontation, a reckoning. The choice was clear in his mind. Brenda first. She was his wife. She owed him the truth, however ugly. Then Mike, the man who had stolen his wife, his golf buddy, his coworker. Mike would pay too, one way or another. Dale wasn't sure how, but the thought settled, firm and cold, in his mind. Grandma Florence's warning now echoed with chilling clarity, no longer a superstition, but a bitter prophecy. Watch out for that one, she has that look. The look of a woman capable of anything, perhaps. He saw it now, in retrospect, in the subtle curve of Brenda's smile, the way her eyes held secrets. It was a brutal "I told you so" from beyond the grave. He felt utterly alone. The silence of his home, usually a comfort, now amplified the emptiness inside him. He didn't reach out to anyone. Who could he tell? How could he explain this profound, intimate betrayal? It was his burden to carry, his truth to uncover. He began gathering evidence, a meticulous collection of small details. Dates and times from the GPS tracker, notes on Brenda's phone activity, the faded Grand River Inn pen he still kept hidden. He wanted to be ready. He wanted facts. His decision hardened with each piece of evidence he collected. They would all pay a price for this. A cold, quiet resolve settled in his heart. Dale waited for the right moment, for a quiet evening at home when their daughter Sarah was asleep, and the house settled into its nightly rhythm. Dinner had been a tense affair, Brenda chattering nervously about her day, Dale responding in monosyllables. After clearing the table, he followed her into the living room, where she was flipping through channels, a forced casualness in her movements. "Brenda, we need to talk," he began. His voice was flat, devoid of the emotion churning inside him. He wanted it to be clinical, precise. He watched her. Her hand froze on the remote. Her back was to him, but he saw the subtle shift in her posture, the way her shoulders tightened. She knew. She didn't turn around immediately, but a slow, almost imperceptible sigh escaped her lips. "About what, Dale?" she asked, her voice a little too light, a little too innocent. He didn't answer the question directly. Instead, he pulled the Grand River Inn pen from his pocket, setting it on the coffee table between them. Then from another pocket, he produced a printout of the GPS tracker's logs, highlighting the repeated visits to the hotel. "This," he said, his voice still low, "and the lies, the late nights, the phone calls you wouldn't take in front of me, the little discrepancies in your stories." He laid out the evidence piece by piece, not yelling, not accusing, just presenting the facts as he knew them. Her initial denial was weak, a half-hearted shake of the head. "I don't know what you're talking about, Dale," but her voice cracked, and her eyes, when she finally turned to face him, were already welling up. The tears came quickly then, a desperate, almost performative plea for understanding. "It meant nothing, Dale, I swear," she cried, reaching for his hand. "It was a mistake, a moment of weakness." The words rang hollow in his ears, an empty echo against the weight of the evidence. "Why, Brenda?" he asked, his voice cracking, the pain finally breaking through his carefully constructed calm. "Tell me why. After 7 years, after everything we built." He didn't expect an answer that would truly satisfy him, not one that could justify the wreckage. He just needed to hear it. She choked back a sob. "It just happened. He was there. I was lonely." The confession came, halting and broken, but undeniable. The affair. With Mike. It had been going on for months, she admitted, a whisper of shame in her voice. Dale felt a visceral punch to his gut, a confirmation of his deepest fears, and still it was a brutal shock. The intellectual knowledge of the affair was one thing. Hearing it from her lips, giving it voice, made it real, raw, and agonizing. "How could you do this to us?" he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "To our family, to Sarah." His voice cracked, the raw pain finally breaking through his carefully maintained composure. He didn't yell. The anger inside him was cold, precise, cutting deeper than any shout could have. It was an anger born of betrayal, of a future irrevocably altered. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the wife he loved, but a stranger, capable of a deceit he couldn't have imagined. Brenda begged for forgiveness. She promised to end it, to cut off all contact with Mike, to do whatever it took to make things right, to rebuild. She reached for him again, but he flinched away, the touch feeling repulsive. "It's too late," he said, his voice raspy, a stranger's voice. "The trust is shattered, Brenda. There's nothing left to rebuild." He looked around their living room at the familiar couch, the faded rug, the photos on the mantelpiece, and saw it all crumbling before his eyes. Years of marriage, of shared dreams, reduced to dust. "It's over," he stated, not a question, but a finality. Not just the affair, us, our marriage. The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. A chilling silence descended upon the house then, thick and suffocating. It was the sound of a family breaking apart, of a life ending, not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating collapse of everything Dale had known. Brenda sobbed openly now, her face buried in her hands, but her tears felt distant, irrelevant to the profound emptiness settling within him. Days crawled by, each one heavier than the last. Dale moved through this like a ghost, working at Valentini's, helping Sarah with her homework, but his mind was a constant hum of pain and betrayal. He couldn't keep it to himself anymore. He needed a clear head, a neutral ear, someone who understood how things worked in their small town. He called Frank. "Meet me at the garage," Frank said, his voice unusually grave on the phone. "This ain't something for over the wires." Dale drove to Frank's auto repair shop after Valentini's closed for the night. The large metal building was dark, except for a single bare bulb hanging over Frank's workbench. The air inside was thick with the scent of oil, grease, and exhaust. a familiar masculine smell that somehow felt right for the conversation ahead. Tools lay neatly organized on pegboards, glinting under the dim light. Frank was waiting, wiping his hands on a rag, his face etched with concern. Dale recounted everything, starting from the hotel pen, detailing his quiet investigation, the GPS tracker, the quiet devastation of the confrontation with Brenda. His voice was raw, hoarse from the effort of speaking the unspeakable aloud. He didn't try to hide the shame, the anger, the profound hurt. He just laid it all out, cold and factual, just as he had laid it out for Brenda. Frank listened, his face grim, occasionally nodding, never interrupting. His eyes, usually sharp and quick, were focused, empathetic. He just let Dale talk, letting the words hang in the heavy air between them. When Dale finally fell silent, Frank tossed the rag onto the workbench. "That son of a bitch, Mike," Frank muttered, the words low and dangerous, an edge Dale hadn't heard before. Frank walked over to a small refrigerator, pulling out 2 beers. He handed one to Dale. Always knew he had a slick way about him. Never trusted those eyes. "I thought he was my friend," Dale said, the words bitter. Frank took a long swallow of his beer. "He ain't no friend, Dale, never was. A man who does this, he's something else entirely." He leaned against the workbench, facing Dale. "You gotta protect yourself now, legally, emotionally. Don't do anything rash. Think clearly. This ain't just about you, Dale. It's about what folks know, what folks will say. This town talks." He paused, letting the implication hang. The judgment of their community, a silent, powerful force in their Midwestern lives, was as real as any legal consequence. Frank's gaze sharpened. "I got ways, Dale. Ways of dealing with fellas like Mike that ain't strictly by the book." He didn't elaborate, but Dale understood. Frank had connections, a certain reputation. The offer was subtle but unmistakable. Dale hesitated, torn. A part of him, a raw, primal part, craved violent revenge, wanted to lash out, to make Mike feel a fraction of the pain he was experiencing. But the quiet, Midwestern sense of decorum, the decades of suppressing overt displays of emotion, held him back. There was also Sarah to consider. What kind of man would he be, acting out like that? "You need to face him, Dale," Frank urged, his voice firm but not forceful. "Man to man. Let him see what he's done. Look him in the eye." They discussed a plan then, quietly, methodically. Dale would orchestrate a meeting with Mike, a private reckoning. Not at work, not in public, but somewhere neutral, where they could speak without interruption. Frank offered to be there. "Not to interfere," he said, "but to make sure things don't get out of hand. Or to make sure they do, if that's what you decide." Frank's presence would be a silent declaration, a show of solidarity, a warning. The weight of family honor, of standing tall in the face of such a profound betrayal, settled on Dale's shoulders. It was a heavy burden, but also a source of unexpected strength. He felt a flicker of resolve, cold and hard. He would see this through, no matter the cost. "It's time Mike understood the price of his actions," Dale concluded, his gaze hardened, the beer cold in his hand. The garage light cast long shadows, reflecting the stark, unforgiving path he was about to walk. Life has a way of revealing its true costs when you least expect it, forcing choices that redefine everything. You'll want to stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The plan solidified over the next few days. Dale would make the call. He'd pretend it was about work, about the unspoken tension that had settled between them at the plant. He'd frame it as a need to clear the air, to ensure their professional relationship remained intact. A plausible lie given their history as colleagues and golf buddies. The location, the Marriott, not the Grand River Inn, which was too obvious, too pointed. The Marriott was another generic business hotel, just down the road, close enough for Mike to frequent. It still carried the weight of the pen, of Brenda's betrayal, but with enough plausible deniability to keep Mike unsuspecting. Dale arranged the time for a weekday evening, after work, when Mike would be alone, probably thinking he was meeting Dale for a drink and a quiet discussion. Frank made some subtle calls, pulling in favors, ensuring Mike wouldn't have any unexpected company waiting for him. They wanted this to be private. Dale spent days preparing himself mentally. He rehearsed what he would say, how he would stand, how he would look Mike in the eye. The image of Mike and Brenda, animated and intimate at Sal's, played on a loop in his mind, fueling a cold, steady anger. He considered bringing a weapon, a knife, a wrench, anything to embody the violence he felt simmering inside him. But he decided against it. This wasn't about cheap brutality. He wanted to face Mike with his bare hands, with his words, to make him understand the depth of the damage he'd caused. He wanted a reckoning, not a back alley ambush. The drive to the Marriott was heavy with foreboding. It was the same route he'd taken countless times, but now every street sign, every passing car felt infused with a new, dark significance. The familiar Midwestern landscape of strip malls and chain restaurants seemed to mock his shattered sense of normalcy. He remembered Grandma Florence's words, "Always guard your heart." He felt his heart was now an open wound, exposed and raw. He arrived early, as planned. The Marriott lobby was plush, impersonal, filled with the faint scent of stale coffee and cleaning solution. He walked straight through to the hotel bar, a dimly lit space with high-backed booths and a long, polished counter. He took a secluded table near a window, giving him a clear view of the entrance without being easily seen. He wanted to observe, to watch Mike's approach. A tremor of nerves ran through him, a cold shiver down his spine. But underneath it, a simmering rage kept him steady, grounded. It was a cold, hard knot in his stomach, a readiness to confront the man who had stolen his peace. He scanned the bar, noticing the few other patrons, making sure no one looked out of place. No one looked like Frank, or anyone Frank might have sent. He trusted Frank, but he still needed to be aware. He caught the bartender's eye, a young woman with tired eyes. "Bourbon, neat," he ordered, his voice steady. The glass felt heavy in his hand. He took a slow sip, letting the burning liquid coat his throat, steeling himself for the confrontation to come. The minutes stretched, slow and taut. Then he saw him. Mike walked through the hotel entrance, looking oblivious, carrying a worn leather briefcase. He paused, scanning the lobby, then the bar, his eyes moving over the tables. He hadn't seen Dale yet. Mike smoothed his tie, a nervous habit Dale had noticed before. He looked tired, older than his 30-something years. He looked like any other man coming in for an after-work drink, completely unaware of the maelstrom awaiting him. This was it, the moment of truth. Dale took another slow sip of bourbon, his gaze fixed on Mike. He felt the cold determination settle deep within him. Mike spotted Dale at the secluded table. He walked over, a polite, almost jovial expression pasted on his face, the kind he used for casual encounters at the plant or on the golf course. "Dale, good to see you, man. What's up? Been a while." He reached out a hand for a handshake, his usual confident gesture. Dale didn't move. He kept his hands on the table, clutching his bourbon glass, his eyes fixed on Mike's, cold and unwavering. The smile slowly slid from Mike's face, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then apprehension. He let his hand drop. "We're not here to talk about work, Mike," Dale stated, his voice low, almost a whisper, but with an edge that cut through the bar's muted background noise. "We're here to talk about Brenda." The words hung in the air like a pronouncement. Mike's face fell, the color draining from it. A sudden realization washed over him, wiping away any trace of his earlier bravado. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape, a hidden camera, anything to explain the accusation. Dale pulled the Grand River Inn pen from his pocket, the cheap plastic glinting under the dim bar lights, and placed it on the table between them, next to his bourbon. "Recognize this?" Mike swallowed hard. "Itawam." He stammered, a desperate, pathetic attempt at denial. I I don't know what you're talking about, Dale. That's just a pen. Could be anybody's." He tried to deflect, to act innocent, but the sweat beating on his forehead, the way his eyes avoided Dale's, screamed guilt. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling. Dale didn't raise his voice. He just recounted it all, the investigation, the tracker, the hotel visits, the lies, Brenda's tearful confession. He spoke in the same factual, clinical tone he had used with Brenda, leaving no room for doubt, no space for Mike to wiggle out. "You think this is some game, Mike?" You think you can just walk into my life, into my marriage, and wreck it? You think there are no consequences? Mike finally broke. His shoulders slumped, his gaze dropping to the pen on the table. I, I'm sorry, Dale, he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper, thick with shame and a pitiful attempt at apology. It was a mistake. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Dale felt a surge of adrenaline, a raw, hot wave that threatened to snap his control, his hands clenched beneath the table. Every fiber of his being screamed to reach across the table, to grab Mike by the collar, to make him feel a fraction of the pain he'd inflicted. But he held back, forcing the rage down, channeling it into his voice. You don't just betray a man like me, Mike, Dale hissed, the words cutting like ice. You don't betray my family. You don't betray my daughter. His voice was low, laced with a menace that felt alien even to himself. You will stay away from Brenda. You will disappear from our lives. You will not call her. You will not text her. You will not come near her. Or I swear to God, Mike, you will regret it every single day. Just then, Frank emerged from the shadows of a nearby booth, stepping slowly into Mike's peripheral vision. Frank didn't say a word, didn't make a gesture. He simply stood there, a silent, imposing figure, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes fixed on Mike with a gaze that promised retribution. His presence was a physical manifestation of the threat Dale had just delivered. Mike saw him, his face, already pale, turned an ashen white. He swallowed again, his eyes wide with a fear that was finally real. He knew. He understood. I have to go, Mike stammered, pushing himself away from the table, almost knocking over his chair. He didn't even attempt to make excuses, just turned and fled, almost stumbling over himself in his haste to escape the hotel, leaving Dale with a hollow victory, the taste of bourbon and betrayal lingering on his tongue. In the days and weeks that followed the confrontation at the Marriott, Dale felt a strange, unsettling mix of emptiness and relief. The rage that had fueled him had dissipated, leaving behind a hollow space, an echo where his anger once resided. The certainty of his actions had given way to a quiet weariness. Mike vanished. From their social circle, from the plant where they'd worked side by side. Rumor had it he'd packed up and left town entirely, unable to face the fallout. Lisa, Mike's wife, was devastated. Dale heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd found out about the affair, probably after Mike's panicked flight. The humiliation of it all had been too much for her to bear in a town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Brenda moved out, the divorce proceeding quietly, efficiently. There were no dramatic scenes, no arguments over furniture. Just paper signed, a shared life disentangled, a somber end to their 7 years together. The house felt too big now, too silent, filled with the ghosts of what used to be. The family knew. His parents, his aunts and uncles, even the memory of Grandma Florence. Their silence spoke volumes, a mixture of sympathy for Dale and unspoken judgment for Brenda. No one outright condemned her, but the looks, the careful avoidance of her name, conveyed it all. Frank, true to his word, remained a steady, unwavering presence. He helped Dale navigate the practicalities, the divorce papers, the division of assets. More than that, he was there for the emotional fallout, a quiet confidant in the garage or over a beer. You did what you had to do, Dale, Frank would say, his voice firm. Some things a man just can't let slide. Dale felt the sting of public whispers, the poor Dale looks he'd catch from customers at Valentini's, the carefully veiled questions. He learned that infidelity didn't just break a marriage, it splintered communities, casting long shadows of doubt and speculation. His private pain had become a public spectacle, even in its quiet Midwestern way. The restaurant became his sanctuary. The familiar rhythm of work, the clatter of plates, the sizzle of garlic, the friendly faces of regulars, was a balm to his raw soul. It was a place where he could lose himself in routine, where he was Dale, the dependable owner, not Dale, the cuckolded husband. He often reflected on the price that had been paid. His marriage was shattered, a wreckage of broken trust. Brenda's reputation in their small town was disgraced, a scarlet letter branded by whispers and averted gazes. Mike's life was ruined, his career and family gone, his future uncertain. The weight of his own decisions, the choices he'd made in the face of betrayal, settled on him, a heavy, permanent burden. He had sought justice, but it tasted bitter. He saw Brenda once more, a chance encounter at the grocery store. She looked thinner, her eyes holding a sadness he hadn't seen before. They exchanged polite, distant nods, two strangers who once shared everything. She was a ghost of their past, a painful reminder of what they'd lost. The pain of betrayal lingered, a phantom limb that ached long after the amputation. He wondered if he would ever truly trust again, if his heart, once so open and believing, could ever fully heal from the wound. The quiet consequences of their actions had spread far beyond the initial affair, touching many lives, leaving a trail of broken connections and shattered innocence. He understood Grandma Florence's wisdom now, the fragility of trust, the importance of guarding one's heart, not with walls, but with clear sight and unwavering honesty. The lesson had been brutally learned, and the scars would remain. Months turned into a year, then two. Dale slowly, painstakingly, rebuilt his life, brick by painful brick. It wasn't a grand project, but a quiet, day-to-day effort, like tending a garden after a long, hard winter. The initial shock receded, replaced by a dull ache that sometimes flared, but mostly remained a quiet presence. He focused intently on Valentini's, pouring his energy into the business. The restaurant, once just his livelihood, became his sanctuary. The familiar rhythm of the kitchen, the predictable demands of customers, the precise measurements of ingredients, all offered a solace he couldn't find anywhere else. He expanded the menu slightly, added a new dessert, and found a quiet satisfaction in the small successes. Frank and Sharon remained his steadfast friends, a constant, comforting reminder of loyalty and true kinship. They didn't pry, didn't offer unwanted advice, but their presence was a silent affirmation that some bonds could endure even the harshest storms. Frank would stop by the restaurant for coffee, exchanging quiet nods that spoke volumes. Sharon would send over a casserole sometimes, just because. He occasionally heard rumors about Brenda. She'd moved to a different part of the state, trying to start fresh, people said. He never sought her out, never felt the need. She was a chapter closed, a book laid aside. Mike was even more of a distant memory, a shadow of a past Dale hoped to forget entirely. He never saw him, never heard his name at the plant or on the golf course. It was as if he'd simply ceased to exist in Dale's world. Slowly, cautiously, Dale started dating again. He went on a few dinners, met a few women through mutual friends. He found himself wary now, testing the waters, guarding his heart more fiercely than ever before. The lesson of betrayal had been learned, a bitter experience that left him with an ingrained caution. He could smile, he could laugh, but a part of him remained on guard, always. The memory of the affair, the betrayal, never fully faded. It was a scar, a permanent reminder etched onto his heart. It didn't consume him, but it shaped him. He carried a quiet strength now, born from enduring the unthinkable, a resilience forged in fire. He understood that morality wasn't just about right and wrong, about black and white, but about consequences, about living with your choices, good or bad, for the rest of your days. The Midwestern landscape around him, stoic and enduring through seasons of harsh winters and vibrant summers, mirrored his own slow healing. He often sat on his porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky over the distant fields, pondering the complexities of life, the interconnectedness of decisions and their far-reaching effects. Dale had paid his price, losing a marriage, a future he had envisioned. Brenda had paid hers, losing her family and her standing in the community. Mike had paid his, losing everything. The scales had balanced in their own harsh, unforgiving way. He was a different man now, quieter perhaps, wiser certainly. He carried the weight of experience, the understanding that life could deliver blows that reshape you entirely. Life moved on, but the echoes of betrayal, the quiet pain, would forever be a part of Dale's story, a subtle underlying current in the river of his continuing existence.